Well, good morning. We're back here at Hope Central for another exciting talk. Thanks so much to everyone that's been with us over the weekend. We have 9 days of hope. We are just now starting day 3. I'm so excited. Hacker Hunter is our leadoff talk for the morning. I'd like to say thank you so much. This is a talk that's all about how hacking is a mystery to television and film producers. We're going to hear about what that means and what our speakers have to say about it. Rainer Bach is with us, and also Laura Meza Ingram. Thanks so much for being with us, and please, let's hear what you have to say.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Greg, for that intro. My name is Laura Ingram. I am the story producer for Hacker Hunter, which is a documentary series all about cybercrime and cybersecurity. As story producer, my job is to essentially find the characters and the people to tell the stories that we're trying to recreate as documentaries. My background is working as a freelance filmmaker and photographer, and I'll hand over to Rainer, my colleague.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for having us. We are a last minute addition, basically. So we heard someone dropped out, and that's how we were allowed to be the morning entertainment here today. I'm executive producer of the Hacker Hunter series, and I'm actually working at Kaspersky in the marketing. So Hacker Hunter is, in the end, produced by Tomorrow Unlocked, which is a production house that is owned by Kaspersky. And I've been in PR in cybersecurity for a long time, so not doing anything relevant in research, but trying to get it out there to the public. And what I've what I've noticed over the years, and what has created a growing frustration with me and a lot of colleagues, was that there are such interesting and amazing stories in cybercrime and cybersecurity. And today we have a share of, as Interpol told us last week, 50-50 between cybercrime and real crime. But it is so difficult for media to actually report on crime in the depth that it would, so cybercrime, I mean, in the depth that it would actually, that it should be reported on. And a few years ago, a filmmaker called Hugo Bartley came to us and said he would like to do a cybercrime, real crime documentary series, and we invited him to our Security Analyst Summit in Tenerife at that time. And this is how Hacker Hunter started, because he joined that that conference and was filming loads of interviews, hours of interview material, and we stayed in touch after that. And 2 years later, I think it was, we met for coffee in London, and he told me that, well, he's still trying to get that series sold, but commissioners that he's speaking to simply are not interested because they don't understand what it's about. They think it's not relevant to their audiences. They think it's not visual enough and such things. And at that moment, I said, okay, look, we have the budget. Let's do this together. Let's try. Let's see if we can do a series about cybercrime and hacking and cybersecurity in some way that is at the same time entertaining and accurate. And that's how we started working on this last year. Put out 2 episodes last year, and we'll publish another 2 episodes this year. And well, if you look at hacking in Hollywood, in movies in general, it's often a painful experience, isn't it? You see totally unrealistic depictions of hacking, totally over-the-top mega hacking, where someone would hack into the, I don't know, Bank of England within a second, or where they would be using super mega amazing tools that look super crazy on screen, but actually have no actual meaning. And I know that it frustrates many people. It did frustrate us too, and it's something we did not want to do. But then on the other hand, well, hacking is a bit of a, don't want to say anything wrong here, rather boring, time-consuming task from a filmmaking perspective. It's not mega screen friendly, and when I speak to our own researchers, And I would ask them, okay, how do we visualize that? What did you do to find this? They would say, well, I was sitting in front of a screen for 18 hours in a row and went for a cigarette from time to time. So that obviously is not amazing film material, but it is the reality. And so what we tried to do in this series was, well, be at the same time realistic and entertaining. And yeah, Lara will give you a few examples of how we approach this, what we're trying to do there.
Yes. So obviously, you know, coming from a documentary standpoint, it's a different ball game from fiction and film and the things that you would see in Hollywood. Obviously, they have a lot more license to just work purely with their imagination, even if they're offending some people or it's a bit cliche, it's not a big deal. But documentary obviously is about real people and real stories. So there's a bit more of a responsibility to portray that accurately and with honesty and authenticity. So for us, there were a couple of tools and filmmaking methods that we would use to do this in the episodes that we've already produced. So we would do things like reconstruction scenes. So obviously, you know, when we're telling stories about cybercrime incidents or big hacks that have happened in the past, you know, there are things that we obviously couldn't film because we're retelling a past story. So we would essentially pick up specific scenes from our contributors' interviews and then actually recreate that scene where we would cast people and we would, you know, do a lot of research around it, trying to make sure that we got as many details as accurate as possible. So for example, in our second episode, we did an episode about WannaCry, the global ransomware attack, which I'm sure everyone knows about, and also the story of Marcus Hutchins from when he was in his parents' bedroom in England, stopping the malware from spreading all the way up to his trial last year. And obviously it was a little bit tricky to cast an actor that looks like Marcus. So trying to find someone that was mixed race but had light skin with a ginger afro was a little bit tricky. But we managed to find a way around it. And yeah, essentially, I mean, you can see on these slides here, we did a reconstruction scene of this interrogation that happened when Marcus was leaving Vegas from a hacker conference. He was in the airport heading back to the UK. And it was at that moment that the FBI took him to a room at the back of the airport and started interrogating him and questioning him for what he later found out was his creation of the Kronos malware when he was a teenager. And then obviously, you know, there are other tools that we would use, like, for example, the courtroom scenes, where even though we were actually at the courthouse, we weren't allowed to bring cameras in. So we would basically we hired a courtroom artist to do sketches and animate that. So those are some of the tools that we used for episode 2. Another thing that we would do is we would use visual motifs and essentially pick out like a theme or a motif that was quite prominent in the story. And then we would play with it visually to inject some more cinematic style filming. So the first episode we did was about Carbonac, the cyber criminal group, and ATM jackpotting. And so obviously a very common theme in that story was this idea of money and ATMs. I think it's on the next slide, Reiner. Yeah, there we go. So we managed to hire out an ATM that was actually a working ATM from a prop house in London. And essentially we hired out a black box studio. We built a big rig so that we could get really nice kind of smooth slider shots with a camera. And we basically just filmed slow motion money, cash, fake cash that we bought off Amazon, and we had fans underneath. You can see in the behind the scenes photos, and literally we just filmed slow motion money flying around. And that was one of the kind of visual themes that kept coming up throughout the film. So it's essentially just a way of trying to inject a bit more cinematic stylized filming to kind of break up the interviews, to illustrate what people are saying, but also try to keep it, you know, playful and dramatic, but also accurate. Another few things that we would also do is, you know, using things like graphics, color grading to create moods, archive, and even music. So for every episode, we have a music composer actually create an original score. And through there, we've been able to really create something that's still very cinematic, but also very real. I'm gonna hand over to Reiner to talk about historical.
What also is always helpful is if we don't have to talk about hacking too much when we're talking about hacking, right? I think it's one of these approaches where people think, okay, this is about cybercrime. We have to show a hacker doing something, but sometimes it's much more interesting to actually show the historical context. If you look at Carbanak, for example, that episode, that was our first episode, we strongly focused on Barnaby check and looking at ATM check potting. And we were quite lucky to find number one, historical photography of him and presentations at hacker conferences like this one that would then help actually tell the story in a very realistic way, because we had him retrospectively basically demonstrating how this technology works. And for sure, this is gold for filmmakers in that case, because it helps us to be, number one, 100% realistic, and secondly, give a historical context. We're currently filming an episode about the Olympic destroyer attack on the Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang in 2018. And that again gives a very, very rich historical setting with lots of news footage around. And I have the feeling that we would be able to film that film nearly without any scenes of hacking, which for sure is very helpful in a way, because the danger is always there that when you try to shoot hacking in an entertaining way, you are overdoing it a bit. And we have to admit that even we are not necessarily always aware that we are maybe going a bit too far. Lara, back to you.
So that's definitely one thing that we're always trying to keep in mind when we're making these films, is the idea of just trying to avoid stereotypes of hackers. And, you know, we know that there are so many. One of the most common ones is like this teenage boy, like in a basement in his parents' house, wearing a black hoodie, and or just like hooded figures in general, hoodies, like anonymous, things like that. And so, you know, in certain points of the series, we've tried to actually call out those stereotypes, and we've tried to create something new and challenge them in a way. So in one of the reconstruction scenes, for example, in our first episode on Carbanak, you know, one of our contributors is talking about how Carbanak is like a full-blown operation. It's a big network of people. And so as part of that reconstruction scene, we had a guy that was smartly dressed in a suit. We had him kind of under the spotlight, sitting at this like big throne-like chair on a big desk. And that was like a little bit playful. It was a little bit exaggerated maybe, but we wanted to just give this idea that, you know, hacking, although there are a lot of amateur hackers out there, obviously the people that we were kind of talking about with regards to Carbanak were really like big players. It's like a multi-million-dollar kind of network that they're running, and they really are working as business professionals. Another stereotype that we've also been trying to challenge a little bit is the idea that hackers are always men. So in our third episode, which is still in production, we're actually shooting a reconstruction scene with a hacker, but we've actually cast a woman to play the hacker. So, you know, we might not always get it right. We might still have things in the episodes that are a bit like eye roll or, you know, a bit cliche, but it's definitely important for us as filmmakers to make sure that we have off the record conversations with hackers. You know, even if that doesn't lead to an interview, we would still have those conversations with them to even just run things by them and say, you know, if we shot a scene of, you know, XYZ, would this be something that you can imagine as being real in your world, or is that a bit too far? You know, just running things by them, seeing is this an accurate portrayal, or does it just make you roll your eyes and think, oh, it's such a cliche? And, you know, obviously the whole point of documentary filmmaking is that you are able to go deeper into a subject. You have the time to explore things beyond these sensationalist news headlines. So it's something that we really value and something that we're very grateful for, actually, as part of our tasks. So yeah, over to you, Rainer.
Yeah, we also, as I said before, I mean, we don't have to picture hacking scenes a lot to talk about cybercrime. So obviously we are looking very much at people, at personal experience. Also extremely important for us, and well, what makes them best for our films are personal stories that we can tell. And we have that one story, or that one scene in the first film, where one of our contributors actually told us the story how they were called into a bank that was attacked by Carbonite, and they were sitting there and they knew, well, they had a feeling, they had a hunch, let's say, that someone was watching them. So they were sitting at a computer in that branch. They were sure that the computer was infected, and so what they did was they just typed in hello in Russian, because it was in the Ukraine, I think, in an open Word document, and they waited a bit, and a few seconds later someone typed hello back, and like that they obviously had made contact. And this is very obviously, as you can see on the screen, not complicated hacking. Nevertheless, it is the kind of story that makes for a beautiful film reconstruction scene where we can say, okay, this has actually happened. Best thing about it is people out there understand it. It is quite easy to imagine for someone that they are now sitting in front of a computer. Someone has hacked their computer in some way and would be typing something. It's maybe even a scene that we would have seen in older movies about hacking, but still, this is realistic. This happens, so this is something that we are absolutely happy to take in then. And when we started this whole thing, we didn't know, would we get these kind of stories? Would someone tell us a story about how they were sitting in front of a screen and in some way communicating with an attacker directly or something like that? It's difficult. Access is always an issue for documentary filmmaking. And as we are a corporate production house, as I said in the beginning, I'm working for Kaspersky. Really, the main question we asked ourselves at the very, very beginning was, why would anyone want to speak to us if we do these films? I mean, we have a serious mission. We really want to make good films. We don't want to do any marketing bullshit here, but how do we convince people that this is actually the case, and that they are not somehow part of an ad campaign or something? How would we get someone from a direct competitor like FireEye to participate in our film, because they are crucial for the story, but would they speak to us, and why and how? And with other contributors, the question was, if they hear that there's a big international company behind this film, would they ask for money that they wouldn't with a normal documentary? That would have led to issues, because we don't have any more budgets than a normal documentary. And these were all these were all concerns I had at the beginning, really big concerns. And luckily they panned out these concerns they were useless, you could say, because we had amazing people like Lara who would have taken care of getting access, and she will tell you a bit more how in these, how long has it been now, 1.5 years that we've been working on this series, we've been able to get access, and how actually happy we are about that.
Yeah, so I mean, we've been pleasantly surprised again and again with how accommodating and how open-minded the vast majority of people have been when we've approached them to do an interview. Obviously there were certain like organizations or cases that were tricky, and we kind of anticipated that from the beginning, but I think we've always been pretty blown away, especially myself. I don't come from a cybersecurity background at all. I come from a film background, and I've just always been interested in cyber and technology and these kinds of stories. But that's kind of the extent of it. So I was always really pleasantly surprised by how the cybersecurity industry and community always felt very open, and people just seemed to be, I guess, very like open to collaborating and really wanting to give the correct credit where credit is due. So I had many cases where I would approach certain security researchers about research they had done on a particular hack or a particular malware, and they would say, oh yeah, I can tell you about this and this, but you really need to also speak to this person and this person and this person. They were the ones that really found it. They were the ones that first identified the sample. They were the ones that named the sample. So I always got the sense of the community being very much, just quite open with intelligence sharing amongst themselves. So I think that really helped us as well. And I think just like any documentary, access is not necessarily always going to be an overnight thing. Sometimes you do have to be a bit convincing. And, I think because our intentions have always been so solid and so, I guess, transparent, we genuinely, as Reiner said, want to tell amazing stories and produce amazing films because these stories really are incredible. I mean, even for me, if I would tell friends of mine, the kinds of things that I'm working on and researching, even Carbonac, the fact that 40 ATMs were hacked remotely and all of the ATM's money is just being spit out of the ATM without anyone touching it, people just have no idea that these things are actually happening outside of cybersecurity community and industry. So, I think there was a lot of trust, I guess, that was built. And I think especially the more episodes we've done, even just the first one and the second one, that really also helped build trust, because people that I would approach and show these episodes, they would be able to immediately see how diverse our contributors are. So we would have security researchers from Kaspersky, but also from FireEye and Cisco Talos, and it would be, such a wide mix. So people would immediately be able to tell that, okay, we actually are trying to make really good documentaries. We're not trying to, promote any one company over another or create any kind of ad. It is literally just about telling these stories and giving them a platform because they are so interesting and important. But we did have a couple of issues. So I guess sort of more on the side of people who, surprise, surprise, do not want to admit that they've been hacked, especially when it's a big organization. For example, when we did the WannaCry episode, because we were based in the UK, a large focus of that story was on the NHS, the National Health Service in the UK, where huge parts of the NHS, hospitals, emergency services were all completely shut down because of the ransomware attack. And during the research phase and outreach, I contacted about 40 hospital trusts, and not one single one of them agreed to be interviewed. They were just absolutely no way. And even when we tried to explain, look, we're trying to focus on the lessons and we're trying to, make these stories so that people can learn from these mistakes, there's just so much resistance, and it's understandable. But there are ways around it. So in the end, I found a doctor who was actually in the middle of heart surgery at one of the hospitals that was affected by WannaCry. So he was there, he was able to give a firsthand experience, but he actually is not a full-time NHS staff worker. And he kind of works on attachments in hospitals between Israel and the UK. So that was kind of our way in. So there are always ways around it, but it is really difficult in some cases where obviously people don't want to admit that they've been hacked. They don't want to admit that their security systems are terrible. But yeah, it's always a challenge, but we've always found ways around it. So it's been really exciting.
We had a question from the audience here that Greg forwarded to us. Do you think that law enforcement have realistic understanding of hackers, or are they subject to the same glamorization that is so often misportrayed in media? I think both. I think there are definitely people in law enforcement that have a very, very good understanding of what's going on. If we look at a number of people we interviewed, a number of police and law enforcement that we interviewed, it was a very, very good understanding of what was happening and what was realistic. And if we, the best access to law enforcement we had was actually in Taiwan for the Carbonac episode. My feeling was that these people knew very, very well what they were doing there. But then, I mean, not everybody is working in cybercrime units. So I assume there must be a very, very big portion of law enforcement that really only know about their about hacking, well, what they've seen in films. And so for them, most likely, yes, it would be like that. Another example is the judge that was judging Marcus Hutchins. He, if you read or listen to what he said in the end, had a very clear understanding of that Marcus obviously did something extremely useful for the society, while he also did something that was not very extremely useful, actually bad. But then he had enough understanding of the topic to say, okay, we can weigh this up in a certain way and can say this is, he's done so much positive that we should not send him longer into prison. And so I think there's not a clear answer to that, but we have a few examples where we have the feeling that that it works for many people in the law enforcement to understand what's going on. Yeah, let's take that other question before we jump into the rest of our presentation. Have you ever tried to represent a hacker space, hacker community outside of criminal context in media? How would you approach that? Actually, we currently, in a way, are. So there's the CV19 volunteer group that is currently helping hospitals and medical institutions of any kind to be safe in the COVID-19 crisis. There's obviously no criminal context to that at all, but we're filming about that currently. It still has a security aspect and a certain crime aspect to itself, just because of the fact that, well, hospitals are being attacked, but the people that we're focusing on are not criminals. They are not involved in anything criminal, and it's a purely, yeah, their mission is to help in this crisis. I don't think it's much different from depicting or telling a story about cybercrime, really, because again, it's human stories, it's interesting people that we've met there, and maybe building the story arc is a bit more difficult because you don't have the criminal act at the beginning that you could use and that would build suspense. But from getting access and building a story perspective, Lara is nodding, so I assume I'm not saying anything stupid. It seems to be more or less the same to me.
Yeah.
If you have more questions, then keep them coming. We will just jump in whenever we have a bit of time. We just quickly wanted to give a quick overview also of which films we've made, which films are coming up. So we've produced 2 films last year. One was called Hacker Hunter Cashing In. It was about Carbonac. And, well, I don't think I have to explain to anyone here what Carbonac is, but when I heard of Carbonac for the first time, it was really total Hollywood material. People hacking into banks, spitting out of money out of ATMs, sending money mules to pick it up. And it was also surreal and honestly also quite innovative, I found. I thought this is absolute perfect film material. And I still hope someone will write a wonderful script about that, and it will make a wonderful Hollywood movie one day. But for us, for a documentary, for sure, this was super interesting material also because it's so visual, right? Someone walking to a cash machine that is simply giving him oil money, which is super, super interesting. But the question there really was who would give us an inside story, because it's not a secret that banks are not talking about such things usually. would we get someone like Dennis Katana, the supposed mastermind, to talk to us and such things? So that was very unclear at the beginning. Lara was heavily involved in that, so she can tell us a bit more about how we got access there.
Absolutely. So yeah, obviously with Carbonac, I mean, immediately it's an incredible story. It's wild. I mean, yeah, just all the things that you would want from a film. But then obviously, how do you actually create a visual narrative that can, you know, hold audiences in and really do the story justice? So a big thing, I guess, for documentaries, what's really helpful in doing that is actually to locate this big thing like Carbonac. You have to really locate it into a specific time and place. So obviously we did our research with Carbonac. You know, they made approximately up to $1 billion over a few years, stealing money from multiple banks across multiple countries. And then we came across the Taiwan story. So in 2016, about 40 banks, 40 ATMs across Taipei City were hacked remotely, and 22 money mules were sent in to collect the cash. And we really like the Taiwan story because, first of all, it gives a sense of how global cybercrime is. It was nice to kind of focus somewhere that was outside of the US or the UK. We liked having contributors speaking in different languages, you know, for the same reasons. And essentially, we focused on this Carbonac hack of First Bank, where about $6 million disappeared from those ATMs across Taipei. And the other thing that really drew us into that story was basically out of the 22 money mules that were sent in to collect the cash, in the end, 2 of them were caught. And what that really proved, and this is something that came up time and time again with people that we've spoken to from cyber, is this idea that, you know, cyber criminals are notoriously difficult to catch and to arrest. But in this case, 2 of these money mules were actually caught. And, you know, this was obviously one of the rare moments that this has happened from such a crime of such a big scale. We were speaking to actually one contributor for another episode, and she was telling me how the only cyber criminals that the UK catches and arrests are 16-year-olds. So it goes to show how much of a big deal it was that these 2 money mules were actually caught. And the fact that the Taiwanese were able to do that made them very happy to participate in this documentary. This was like a huge source of pride for them, to the point where in the end, there was actually a bit of competition between 2 of the main government ministries that we were dealing with that were involved with, you know, all of the detective work and the tracking down and the arrest of these money mules. So it was like the Criminal Investigation Bureau in Taipei and the Taiwanese Ministry of Justice. So they were actually, what we later found out, were kind of trying to tell us to only really focus on their team as opposed to the other. So for documentary filmmakers to have 2 big players actually fighting for interviews with us, that's like a dream. So in the end, we had amazing access with the Taiwanese, both sides of the Taiwanese law enforcement. They actually ended up giving us like over 50 gigabytes of like straight up footage from the police cameras when they did the raids and found suitcases just packed with cash in these money mules hotel rooms that the police were actually wearing on their vests as they raided the room. So, I mean, it was just absolute gold for us. And, you know, it's one of those things in filmmaking where sometimes you just get really lucky. And in this case, it was just about tapping into the fact that they would have been really happy to be involved because they caught someone. And so that really worked in our favor. And I guess part of access and filmmaking is, you know, you kind of have to be a little bit intuitive with these things. So we sort of went in knowing that they might be proud of these arrests, and then we sort of like played it to our advantage in a way. But then we also told a story that really did them justice, that really highlighted all of their incredible work, because it is really difficult to do what they did. Yeah, and in the end, they were very happy, and so were we. But yeah, over to you, Rainer.
Yeah, we're running a bit short on time. I think we only have 6 minutes left, so let's before we address more questions. The second film we did last year was a film that actually I'm still sometimes being criticized for. I spoke to a security researcher for a film that we're doing right now and asked if he would want to appear in that one. And he told me that no, he doesn't want to because we did a film about Marcus Hutchins and he doesn't like Marcus Hutchins, and that's why he would not appear in any other of our films. And most likely there are more people in the industry or in the cyber security scene that would think similar. But why did we do a film about that? Well, WannaCry obviously is the biggest publicized cyber attack that ever happened. So in a way, we had to focus on that. It was a good starting point for one of our first 2 episodes. And well, Marcus, with his story from going from being a relatively unknown researcher to being the hero of the moment to down to zero, being arrested by the FBI, obviously a super interesting story. And I think we made relatively clear that we are undecided if he's a hero or a villain, but still we thought it is a very interesting story. And also our director Hugo absolutely definitely wanted to film that film, so we had to give it to him. Well, we have almost 60 minutes actually, I'm being told, so we can continue waffling. And yeah, I mean, a film that we absolutely wanted to do, a film that was very personal, and a film in which we were lucky to get super amazing access because, yeah, Marcus just spoke to us, and Lara can tell more about how that happened.
Yeah, so it's funny because initially when we were talking about WannaCry and Marcus Hutchins, and you know, I think when Hugo first decided he wanted to do this, we still didn't have all of the information. We didn't know when his court hearing was, but as we started to have our meetings and our initial research, you know, we started getting court dates, and so we were like, okay, we need to really move with the story. And initially we thought that we could do the film regardless of whether Marcus agreed to be a part of it. We were like, okay, there's so much archive, there's court filings, there's social media. But in the end, you know, thank God that he did agree to it, because I think there's no way that we could have done it without him. If you watch the piece, you'll see that it is very much character driven. It's a lot more of a human story. You know, the Carbonac episode was a lot more about an event, and because we had the access with the law enforcement and the archive, that was sort of the energy that really pushed the film forward. But with the WannaCry piece, it was really character driven. And it turned out, you know, the fact that we were at the time a startup tech content platform with already strong links to the cybersecurity community, this was actually a huge plus for Marcus. He kind of liked that we were, like, at the time a bit more low key, and we already knew what, you know, what was what in cyber, with obviously the links to Kaspersky and Tomorrow Unlocked. Apparently his lawyers had been pressuring him to do, you know, big exclusive interviews with CBS News, but that wasn't what he wanted. So yeah, we filmed with him over a few months. We followed his trial. We were there at his final court hearing. You know, and obviously for us, it was very interesting to follow the story and how divisive he was as a character. And I think, sure, like, some people might say, oh, but you're giving this guy a platform and he did something really wrong when he was 17, you know. But I guess from a documentary point of view, the fact that, you know, he did make up for it in a way, you know, he really did do a lot of great work. He stopped WannaCry from spreading. So there was a sense that he had kind of on his own terms changed direction. But I think even still, it's important for documentaries to promote or provoke debates and conversations and start dialogues. And I think, Rainer, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that episode was one of the most engaging episodes. There was a lot of engagement, a lot of comments, a lot of people started discussing and debating around that. And that for us is also a really important reason to tell stories like this, to start those conversations.
It indeed was. I think we got a number of hate clicks and a number of like clicks, but we got, yeah, this episode was actually watched quite a lot. What happened then this year when we started producing episode 3 and 4 was that suddenly COVID hit the world, and somehow it changed everything, right? We didn't really always, we weren't sure if we could produce or not. You've seen lots of film productions being moved back. And we decided not to move back, but we decided we would want to try to nevertheless do it. And it's nevertheless quite interesting, because you'd have directors in your film who are simply used to working in a certain way. And that means they have to be there personally and speak to someone, look them in the eyes, you know, to get that story out of them. And that's not possible right now. So there was a bit of reluctance at the beginning. One of our directors was like, yeah, let's do that. Amazing. Let's try something new. And the other one was, maybe still is like, yeah, but I want to be there. So we needed a bit of technical creativity. You see on the slide that, well, obviously there was lots of video conferencing happening, and we had contributors come in with 6 shirts into the office, having themselves photographed, so we could choose which shirt would be the best for the shoot and such things, which was really quite nice. And on this next slide, you see how we somehow taped a phone to the camera, so our director could be there and do the interview as if she would be in the room. Also, she wasn't. So yeah, it was time for creativity, and in a way, I think we've turned that challenge into an opportunity also, because for the films that we're doing, 2 films about the COVID cybersecurity situation right now, and these 2 films are shot under COVID circumstances, are about the COVID situations, and they will get a look, as you can see on these screens, that represents a bit or demonstrates how the situation was, with lots of video conferencing and stuff like that. So it was quite interesting. Also, this film was a super interesting experience in terms of how much access Lara got from people and support.
Yeah, I was actually really surprised. So for this episode, it's still in production. It's, as Reiner mentioned, it's all about cyber attacks against healthcare institutions, hospitals, the World Health Organization, all of that, you know, obviously it's seen a massive spike since the pandemic. But I was actually really pleasantly surprised with how cooperative and welcoming people have been. So I think out of all the episodes so far, this one is probably our best in terms of access, in the sense that pretty much every single person that we wanted to interview, apart from one, said yes to being interviewed, and, you know, in many cases invited us into their homes, well, invited the local cameraman into their home. So we have obviously been following quite strict protocols in line with, you know, safety and hygiene regulations. So we've had to hire remote cameramen or women, trying to keep the crews as minimal as possible. And then as you saw, and as Reiner explained, our directors would be conducting the interview remotely. But yeah, nevertheless, you know, we've been let into people's homes and offices that are closed for months. They've made arrangements to have them reopen and have us film in there. So it's been absolutely amazing. And I think, you know, maybe there is a sense right now that people are obviously going through the story as we are telling it. So there might be that sense of urgency, or that sense of really wanting to kind of contribute in some way to telling these stories that are quite informative and spreading awareness on how, you know, cybercrime is definitely not going away. It's only increasing. And, you know, attackers see things like pandemics as opportunities. And that we have to kind of be aware of this. So yeah, that was actually really, really positive for us. And we're super excited to release that episode. The second episode that we're currently working on is actually about an old story. So it's about Olympic Destroyer, the cyber attack, the Wiper, that was launched on the Pyeongchang Winter Games in 2018. And that's definitely presented its own kind of set of issues. So, you know, obviously pandemic, same situation, only hiring local crews, but also the fact that we're trying to tell a winter story and like film about Winter Olympics in the middle of summer. So that's also been a little bit tricky, but, you know, we're currently trying to source like an ice hockey stadium that we can film recon scenes in. But I think filming in a pandemic is definitely taught us to just be more creative, as cliche as that may sound. It actually has been so full of lessons, and I think everyone's really taken something different out of it. So yeah, I'm just really grateful, obviously, that we even have these projects to work on right now. And yeah, obviously doing our best to really tell these stories to the best of our abilities. Yeah.
We have 5 more minutes. We have 2 questions currently in this chat, which I would like to address. Let's start with the last one. It's obviously interesting to focus on the action of a real hack. To what extent can you make the long time of quiet learning, programming, etc., just as interesting? In other words, those thousands of hours we sit in front of our keyboards alone, and the education, bullying, and other earlier life factors that lead to that big hack. Well, I think it could be a super, what you just wrote in here could be a super interesting story if it's a story about one person, and we'd be following the development of how did someone end up being who they are today. That would obviously make a very good film. Would we really be able to visualize thousands of hours of coding in front of a TV as a real visualization? I don't think so, because well, we could do a super mega monster time lapse that would show how you're changing from a little kid to a grown-up man sitting in front of the computer most of the time. But would that be super interesting? I'm not sure. The human story behind it, though, would be absolutely mega interesting. And yeah, I think it's a story that someone could tell if we would have the right person and the right access there. We have 3 minutes left, so I kept this as a last question because I have no answer to it. Bruce Schneier mentioned in his session that the elites hack the system for their own benefit. Have you thought about that topic? It sounds like an amazing topic. And it definitely sounds like something a film should be made about. I haven't seen his presentations though, so obviously we'd have to have a look at that later on. We're currently not so much looking at the political dimensions of hacking, but rather at criminal cases. I would say maybe because it's easier to make a film about it, and we're just in our 4th film right now. But I would see that as an interesting option if we look at the social, political effects that hacking has, and that maybe also the fact has that nation states are increasingly getting involved in hacking, or maybe even setting the trends in hacking these days. Yeah, that could be a highly interesting topic to discuss about. And everything that is an interesting topic to discuss is a good topic for film.
I think that links a little bit to our current film that we're in production for. So Olympic Destroyer, you know, that's always been a tricky one in a way, because I guess like one of the main takeaways from that story is really it was this big international whodunit. And obviously, you know, we know that attribution in cyber is such a, well, it's basically impossible. You know, and we know that, you know, there are several cybersecurity firms out there that just as a matter of policy, they just don't attribute, and that's just kind of not their job. They just focus more on the technical aspects, and it's sort of up to law enforcement to do that attribution. And I think in this case, we decided to sort of stay along those lines, and we decided to actually focus on why attribution is so difficult, rather than kind of trying to point the blame or sort of uncover or reveal who was behind Olympic Destroyer. You know, and I guess like throughout the film, we are sort of alluding to it. We're sort of, you know, we used Olympic Destroyer and that attack on the opening ceremony as kind of the opening scene. But we really use that as more of a springboard to launch into this wider issue of attribution and cyber, and why it's not black and white. And we kind of, throughout the film, you'll see when it comes out, if you have a chance to look at it, it essentially takes you through who the usual suspects are, and what the false flags were about, and why certain people might have had motivations to put the blame on North Korea, for example. But I think it's always like a case by case basis. Like with this particular film, that felt like the right thing to do. But I'm sure there are obviously so many other stories out there, and that might be a little tricky, but open, I guess. Yeah, apparently we're almost at time.
Yeah. So we were told to wrap up. So
Okay,
thanks
cool.
for listening to us, and back to Greg.
That was fantastic. We, we all spend so much time absorbed in media, and it's so seldom that we get such an informed look behind the scenes. So on behalf of the attendees, we thank you for being with us today. There's been a lot of enthusiastic chat in the forums about your talk, and I sent some of the questions your way, and I hope you'll continue to be part of the hacker community. And I think you've already discovered what a welcoming community is and how appreciative we are of your engagement. So thank you, be well, and we'll be back in a few more minutes with our next talk.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Bye.